All right, great. Welcome, everyone. Thanks for being here. I feel usually I'm with my clergy colleagues when we have this talk back, and now it's just me. So I'll just have to do my best with all that we've talked about. But I think everybody here has participated in these in the past. You kind of know how we operate it. The way that we really think of it is, the clergy had a lot of time to talk to the congregation. We love to hear just from you what's on your mind on any of the themes that we talked about over Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur in sermons, or anything else that you're thinking about that you'd want to share. So let's just do it so we can make sure we can hear each other. We have everybody just unmute one at a time. If you raise a hand, or in the reactions part, you can raise a hand, and that'll bring you to the forward. I'd love to hear whatever reactions you'd like to share. Or we could be really short. Susan.
It struck me, and I think I live in a little bubble, but it struck me in listening to both you and Rabbi Joseph today that you must hear from a lot of people who are in pain, and that I found that kind of sad, because even though we all get kind of discouraged sometimes, most of the folks that I tend to interact with seem to be weathering all of this okay. And maybe more of us should call you.
Well, I think, part of it is that I don't think everybody always knows that we welcome those opportunities, those conversations. There's where I was thinking a little bit about how, clergy are not therapists. And though we both kind of used some of this language, we want to be careful to know the limits. I had a counseling class in rabbinic school, and the primary thing that the instructor said, I only want you to learn one thing in this class: refer. You're not qualified. You can't actually do this, but refer to somebody who actually knows what they're doing. But the opportunity, I think, sometimes for clergy to be among the support systems, or even to just share some of what you're feeling, that may not be something that you want to share, that you need therapy, that we do in a therapeutic relationship. It can just be that, the existential realities. But I think, Susan, the point that I think is important to raise is that two things that I want to say. One, we're all doing this differently. I think that's part of it. I think our circumstances throughout this time, I see people who've been weathering this alone. I've seen people who have been, as I said last night, fortunate enough to be with someone throughout. I'm very fortunate to be one of those people. I see people here who found new love during this time. That also happens, and there's kind of wonderful. That's a wonderful and beautiful element. And I've seen people who've been really sad and lonely during this time too. And the other thing is that I think this part of what Rabbi Joseph was talking about today. We do have a tendency to put a good face on things. Even when we are suffering, we don't always share it, and so it's a little bit of not assuming that what you see is, or what you're experiencing is what's going on with others. And I think that the other piece that I think is that the realities of the pandemic have been cumulative. I think if we think back to how long was it, about 100 years ago that this started. And I don't know, I was one of those people who say, like, I have to isolate at home? Great. Oh my gosh, this is like best news ever. I could get caught up on my reading. I could like get some sleep. I could just like all of these things are really, and after a period of time, first of all, you don't get caught up on your reading, you don't get caught up on your sleep, but the pain of it, I think, is cumulative. I think it really it hits people in different ways. So it is interesting. I think you're right. To your point, we do hear it and see it in a way that might be different than other people do. Great. Anybody? What else? What's your other reactions? Share it.
I was really taken by the concept of toxic positivity versus Viktor Frankl's term, which was something in front of optimism, tragic optimism. I'm not sure if I understood correctly. And it made me want to go back and read Viktor Frankl. I haven't read it in years and years. And
I always good to go back to Viktor Frankl. Yeah,
and just that's happened to me so many times that we have not seen our because of a series of things, surgery, sickness, and whatnot. We have not seen our grandchildren for 3 years, and they live in Israel. And our daughter had COVID, and I've tried to explain to people, and I get like a lot of this, well, look on the bright side kind of thing, and it's like, oh, really? My daughter's still having memory problems from COVID, and it's and all kinds of other problems. So it's I don't feel like putting on a face. I feel like being real, and being accepted for just whatever I'm feeling on a real level.
Thanks for sharing that, Sherry. I think a lot of us can really relate. I was also not familiar with those terms, and that was I learned a lot from her sermon too. And I think that's as always, life is balance. It's hard and painful to wallow in pain consistently, and so we want to find our ways out of it. But I think most of the time, it is sort of this toxic positivity that we're all familiar with, that our instinct is just our instinct is just to push it aside. This happens with mourning all the time. I think when we lose someone, there is a tendency to say, I'll mourn later. I'm really too busy right now. I've got to, I took off a day for a funeral. I've got to get back to work. And there, this is I think this is where ritual is really important and really helpful. The very fact that Judaism calls on us to have a 7-day mourning period, and then a 30-day mourning period on top of that, and then a year mourning period on top of that, and that there are different customs and different restrictions for each of those times, that there's a kind of, when you follow that, there's an easing back into life. And it does really give you the time to take this mourning seriously. That this is important time, and to be surrounded by people, which I think is also very interesting. That goes against the instinct to isolate, and to just have people around you that remind you of life and positivity. And I don't mean positivity in that sense of forget your troubles, come on, get happy, but that life does continue, And you need to be subtly reminded of that. It's not useful to be told that. To someone just says, "Oh, come on, it's been long enough." That doesn't work. But there is, I really appreciate, as someone who does sit with mourners a lot, that having that time and having that sense of ritual is really, really powerful. Thank you. Joan.
Well, good morning.
Good morning.
Lashana Tova. I guess it's good afternoon now. Um, I really liked the idea that you talked about last night of the 7th year, and resting for the year. And in a way, the last year and a half was resting. But at the same time, I think for me personally, I did a lot of fun things at home and could have spent more time reflecting. I did a bunch of other things as well. And now it seems like we're almost in the mode again of being more careful, staying home more. And I've been through all the TV series and all the talking to people on Zoom. And I really feel like it is time to reflect and take that the next year, not necessarily off, but to put it in a whole different perspective and rethink where I'm going and what I want my life to look like. And the idea of a year of rest for the earth, but for us personally, maybe I can make it more meaningful now.
Thank you, Joan. I think that notion that you didn't use this word, but the intentionality.
Yes.
That we use this year. None of us knew how long this was going to last, and I remember at the beginning people who talking about this was going to be a whole 3 weeks that we were going to have to deal with this, and we went from thing to thing to thing, just in the way that you described. And thank you. That's what I was thinking about, this concept of, can we be intentional with this time, whether we're locked down or not, but can we be thoughtful about using this as a reconnecting time? So I do hope that Ted Lasso never ends, because that was important to get me through.
Yes.
And there are many more series that we do all have to see, but I think that's that idea that this is in our hands, that it's not just happening to us, but that we do have some agency in this. I think it's really interesting. Now I'm kind of reflecting back to something that I talked about last year, the fact that that there are really not very good records about the 1918 pandemic, because people really didn't want to think about it. And it was horrific. People knew less. The way of communicating, in fact, it was against the law to communicate anything against us. It was against the Sedition Act at that time, because we didn't want to make our enemies. We didn't want to seem weak in front of our enemies. So people really couldn't talk about it in a public way. People didn't record it. And it was young people dying at the beginning. And so that a lot of things were very flipped. But it is fascinating that we know very little about how they got through this time period. We didn't have that instruction. And so, I think Rabbi Joseph's teaching in an hour, I think, is very interesting. I found it really instructive to look back at some of the Talmudic literature and look at what the rabbis said about, because they lived through epidemics, localized epidemics all the time, and pretty horrific ones. And so there's actually some really great teachings that are instructive. but I think most of us were kind of left on our own to figure this out on our own.
So
And so
my
I think
grandmother,
yeah,
my grandmother was a nurse during the during the last pandemic, and
wow.
the one thing she only said was, don't put your hands on your face. Never explained why. Don't touch your face.
It's not interesting.
And it wasn't until we got into this pandemic that I understand, that, you don't want germs on your face, but
Wow.
it's funny, but yeah. So,
Oh,
and she
that's
was
so
a nurse during
interesting.
that whole time. It's just,
Yeah. Wow. You're fortunate to have had that, to have had her being able to communicate that to you.
yeah, a little bit,
Thanks,
tiny
Julie.
bit.
That's really interesting.
You made an interesting comment about that. Well, first of all, intentionality, which is, I think, something that many of us don't think about. And having to go through what we've been through, and we're still going through, making good choices. And perhaps one of the higher up reasons for having this pandemic was to wake people up to know that they do have free will and they need to make good choices, and they can't just say, oh, well, God will take care of it, because it didn't work. And
Yeah, powerful. I'm always reluctant to ascribe meaning, but I'm very interested in how we take on meaning, and so the lessons of what we can learn from this, I think, is important. It's a really good point about free will and responsibility.
yes,
And I've been really thinking a lot about this issue of responsibility towards community, the responsibility that we have towards each other. I wish that was a lesson that was greater learned during this time. I would have predicted that we would kind of walk out of this with a sense of we're all in this together, right? That's always the thing. Like, so many people have remembered the feelings of the immediate days of post 9/11, where there was this phenomenal sense of national unity. Divisions faded away. There was a patriotism that hadn't quite gotten into jingoism yet, but there was, that when you're attacked, there is often the sense of unity. And I would have predicted, if this had been a novel, that a pandemic would have brought about a sense of unity, a sense that we're all in this together, fighting an invisible foe. And sadly, the reality has been exactly the opposite. So, what we can do to encourage more communal responsibility, more care for each other, in this time, I think it's important. Gary? You're muted still. There you go. Oh,
Okay.
there you go.
Yes. Hi. Wishing you and everyone a good sealing.
You as well. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. So, thinking about the sabbatical year concept, and one thought that occurred to me listening to your sermon is about how necessary for the health of the earth and the fields the sabbatical year is. And also thinking about, catastrophes we had, like the Dust Bowl, that resulted much from not honoring the needs of the earth. And I'm wondering, looking at pandemics, what are the origins? What might be the origins of pandemics, and how that might relate to how we are not taking care of our world and each other, and how pandemics may come out of that.
Well, I mean, that's I think a really interesting topic, and I don't think we know enough about the origins yet of COVID-19, but I think, the scientists are saying the realities of climate change are, are going to make us more vulnerable to diseases of various kinds, the diseases that we're unaccustomed to as animal populations, go extinct in one area and move into other areas where the human animal interface becomes closer. And I think that's one of the consequences of climate change that hasn't really been talked about that much. I've heard it a little bit in small conversations that's happening in the scientific community. Maybe someone else on this call knows more about this. Almost anyone is going to know more than I do.
I don't know more than anyone, but
fascinating.
I would recommend Jane Goodall. Jane Goodall has written extensively about this and during the pandemic, and about the relationship between humans and animals. I mean, I'm not a scientist or anything, but I would direct anyone interested in
That's
this
great.
topic to check her out.
Thank you. I haven't seen her writings during this time, so I'm gonna look for that. I think I think that connecting Shemitah to climate change is something that people have been doing for many years. And I think reminding us, as you said, Gary, that responsibility, if we're going to abuse the earth, we have a responsibility to take care of the earth. If we're going to use the earth to feed us, as we do, as human beings do, then we have a responsibility to be aware of its cycle and its needs, and not just our needs. Which is why I really appreciated Rashi's distinction that I talked about, that was not about the difference between pruning and cutting, and that whole notion of taking care of the plant, not in terms of what it does for us, but in terms of what its own needs are. And that there's a it is a very different, Shemitah is a very different mindset in general. If everything, human society is about produce growth, I need more, I need more and more land, I need to burn forests in order to get more farmland. I have to do more and more and more of this, and everything is about being more extensive. That there's something really powerful as a biblical text to say, taking a year of not being engaged in that sense of abuse of the land, and of all about what you can get. I mentioned this, but it's powerful to me to see it in Israel, not just because it's like from the Zionist perspective of we're back and we can do, but just that sense that this kind of ancient wisdom can go against Western culture, in that which has that demand of, it's all about, what's the growth in the GDP? How much more are we doing? That there is something that can kind of say, like, stop and allow the earth to have its own rhythm for a time, and its own natural growth and all of those kinds of things. So, it's a great metaphor, it's very cool to see it as a reality too. Thanks, Gary.
Thank you.
Any other thoughts on themes of the holidays, or anything that you're just thinking about right now? How we're getting through it all? Randy?
I think the pandemic is life, but just a little bit more, because we don't really, there are many people, I wish I was more like them, that are very organized and controlling, and they plan their days out, and 90% of the time it works out for them. And right now with the pandemic, it's not quite, not quite there. You know, we can't do everything we want. And also, growing up or living in a country that values freedom and the ability to make choices and so forth, it comes in direct conflict with that. So it's not just, if we were living in communist Russia, I don't know if the lack of opportunities and choices would be as dramatic as it is for us. And it also, I think, for me, what it does is it makes, I've always felt like you have to act upon things. You can't just sit back. You have to go out and demonstrate. You have to go out and whatever it is, you know. And for me, the pandemic is saying, we got to do more. When this is over, we have got to do more, because the opportunities to act are precious. And we need those. And we know that on two fronts, pandemic and politics, we're losing. We know we could lose both everything. We know we can lose our freedoms to make all kinds of choices. So I think that this is, and we also know what fear does. You know, we see that fear causes hate and divides. And so in a way, maybe it's not surprising that a pandemic, if people are so afraid, which apparently they are, because they almost, there's a whole segment of people in our society who would prefer not to deal with the realities, but deal with how they put the world together. And so I think that it's just, it really is a time to move beyond what we were before and to get better.
Thanks, Randy. I'm really reflecting on what you said at the beginning of how humbling this all is. You know, that we, you know, we have a sense, human beings, we can do anything, we can create anything, we can conquer nature, as we were talking about a minute before, that we have this kind of infinite power, and then you know, how little control we have when we're really in this sense of being locked down, that we're you know, we can't control the course of this pandemic individually. We can't really control so many things in our own life, and even, you know, as a species, we're having. I mean, we've done remarkable things. The fact that that these vaccines could be produced with a technology that had been in development for 10 years, and it wasn't invented beforehand, but amazing that this technology had been developed over the course of these 10 years that could create a vaccine, and such an effective, remarkably effective vaccine in such a short period of time. It's like pretty incredible. So it's not like we're powerless, but then we kind of succumb to some of our own conflict and problems and fears. And I think that's an interesting thing to think about by itself, the ways that we respond to fear, and sometimes the regrets that we have when we, you know, after the fear is past and we look back at how we responded, and, you know, why did we act that way? It's like so much now we're 20 years on, sort of saying, you know, how could we have voted to go for war in Afghanistan? Like, whose idea was that, when it was unanimous? I mean, everybody agreed we should do it, right? Iraq, maybe there was a little dissent. Afghanistan, everybody said, of course, right? And much of that was out of fear. and you know, it's hard to look, it's hard to remember how you felt during that time of fear, but it makes people do some of the things that we're seeing now, which is very, very hard. I'm curious if anybody had some reflections on kindness. I kind of thought this would be the big controversy.
Yeah. I'm not sure if I find it difficult to think that people actively wish the harm of an anti-vax, but I fear, I feel that for me, it's almost like a twisted wish for justice, because now on Yom Kippur, we're talking about repentance and ask for forgiveness, and people are just not living with the consequences of their acts. That's just like people living their lives, their livelihoods, their mental health, and we're here on Zoom, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And how is it that we're going to ever be able to reconcile with people that are not willing to make amends, and how we can be kind to someone that is actively ignoring my feelings, our feelings, and our health and our well-being.
Thank you. Thank you. I think kindness is hard. I don't think I wouldn't have devoted the time to it if I thought this was just an easy thing, and we should all just be, you know, nudged a little bit. I think it's very difficult, and for all the reasons that you say. I mean, it's one thing to talk about someone who just has an opinion that's different than mine, but you know, when people's choices affect us, it's as you say, it's very, very hard to reconcile. Nettie, you're muted.
Oh, okay. Let me figure it out.
There you go. You got it. You are unmuted.
Okay.
You're good.
I'm actually in Tide Valley, so on Cycle, Oregon. But
Oh,
of course,
lovely.
yeah,
Thank you for taking the time off to be with us.
Well, I did. Of course, I took off all of Yom Kippur. I can continue on Friday. But anyways, on the kindness, it's really hit me hard because I'm seeing families torn apart, you know, and it's, you know, they have their judgment, and then anybody not doing and complying to their judgment, they're now ostracizing. You know, they're not looking to really want to help or be near or anything. And I find a lot of families are being torn apart.
Yeah, thank you, Nettie. I think we're seeing it. I think many of us see it in our own families, like who are the people that you can't talk to anymore. And this didn't start with pandemic. The polarization that we're dealing with in our country has been going on for a long time and increasing, but we're seeing a very painful time in it.
It's almost like people have lost the capacity to communicate, to discuss, to, all right, so you don't have my view, but let me show you this, this, and this. And there's no discussion anymore. And politically, it's my way or the highway.
It's true. And by the way, I think that kind of division is not just happening between left and right. I think it's happening within the left. I think it's happening within the right. The people who will not talk to each other, even though they're politically in large motion politically aligned, but the subtleties are dividing. I mean, we always know that, Jews have been doing this for a long time. I'm not going to talk to those Orthodox people. My goodness, and we make all of these divisions, and we get very entrenched in our positions. But I think that polarization has become even more. It's not ideological only. It's a unwillingness to see the humanity of another person that you disagree with. It's a in some circles it's a willingness to use language of violence. It's hard. It's really it feels different.
And I think the question here is, how do you deal with it? How do you personally deal with it?
What's been your experience?
I just personally just try to still show compassion and kindness. I mean, I'm a very optimistic person. So even when I get those thoughts in my head that are contrary, I just try to refocus them, do something different. I'll go and walk, but
Yeah.
I don't know. What do other people do?
Good. Thank you, Andrew. Thank you for your comments in the chat about the parable of the drowning man. Yeah, I think that's a part of it is like it's that lack of a sense of responsibility or that communal responsibility. I mean, the fact that our fault lines in America are falling on this place of freedom and independence versus communal responsibility, that's in many ways actually not surprising to me. I think that's where America, that's our mythology. Our legends are about that notion of thinking of America as this land of independence, the self-made person, and the versus that sense of communal responsibility, and we're all in this together. And we fall individually we do fall in one of those two camps. That's kind of, and some of that is very urban versus rural. That's some of the reality that's there. And it doesn't surprise me that we have those different realities. What surprises me is what I think is powerful about America and about the American system. I've been thinking about this. Been thinking about American systems of justice, the adversarial notion of this is our system of justice. It's been on my mind today, and I think that's been part of our strength. The fact that we have these different views, and that we can approach politics and we can approach everything from those different views, and that's actually that's a real positive. That's a strength that helps us not get so locked in our rigid ideals and helps us move forward. But it's become now a weakness instead of a strength. Because we don't talk to each other, it just is, the people who don't agree with me are idiots. The people who believe in this communal responsibility are just a bunch of liberal socialists, and they're just stupid. It's that problem of not disagreeing, but not agreeing in even the way that we talk about all of this. Warren, you wanted to say something?
Yes, this discussion is very interesting to me. Phyllis and I have been fortunate enough, I guess, in the last 3 weeks to get together with some people safely. And we've talked about this issue of how we feel about people that are unwilling to get vaccinated for no other reason than it's some kind of political or crazy thing that they don't want to do. We were with somebody yesterday who has a very serious illness and is concerned that should something happen to him, he won't find a spot in a hospital to get help. And everyone that we've met with, and they're very kind, very loving people, all agree we have no empathy. There's no kindness toward those people who are taking up space and threatening people who we care about. And it's very challenging. One thing that I would say is that it does help to talk about it. So getting together with people and sharing that feeling, it doesn't alleviate it to any great extent, but at least it helps to talk about it.
Thank you. Yeah, I think that is true. That's a part. Just being able to talk about it, and I think part of what I noticed, which is what led me to that sermon, is how many people talked to me about it and how upset they were at their own feelings about this. You know, they didn't doubt that they were right. You know, but that it upset them that they felt this way and that they talk this way. And that, to me, that cognitive dissonance, that is instructive. You know, and I don't think you have to give up feeling. I think this is the thing to me. I don't think you have to give up feeling that you're right in order to have empathy, in order to approach with kindness. I think that's the problem. And your reason for not wanting to have empathy with anti-vaxxers, for example, because you're afraid for your friend who could not have a hospital room when they need it. The logic is right. I don't disagree with you in any way. I just worry about what this does to us to be in this position of being unempathetic. And I think that's true for the people with whom I disagree, who think that I'm crazy and stupid and you know, a slave to government or whatever they think, who completely lack empathy for me. And I think it's not okay to be not okay in all this, right? I think that that's hurting us. Not just the realities that are out there, but our own response to that reality, I think, is hurting us. Marilyn, you had a beautiful story that you shared with us in chat, and you were going to say something about it. Do you want to come to share with us a little bit?
Well, just that I had said to myself, if my sister ever does call me, could I be an adult and accept her like my sister, I thought would never apologize, and she called me at 2:47 this morning and apologized and told me that my niece, whose wedding I was not invited to, is getting a divorce. And so I could either at that point throw it back in her face and say I could have used some support over the last 2 years, or accept her apology and thank her for calling, which is what I did. And so if I slept through services this morning, I can watch the replay. That was a worthwhile thing to talk to her.
Well, you've done the Yom Kippur thing, so I think that's powerful. Thank you for sharing that story. And you know, some years back we talked about this, about the nature of apology, and how hard that is. I mean, I you know, not knowing the details of all this and not knowing your sister, kudos to her for the bravery to reach out to you. You know, we get very, that's what we're talking about here. We get very certain about all kinds of different things. And some of our certainty is, well, you know, if they cared, they would call and apologize. I'm not going to apologize till they apologize. And then nothing happens because everybody believes that they're in the right and they've no reason to do this. And I think that's what this is the powerful message of Yom Kippur. I mean, you couldn't find anything more appropriate. That it's on you to make the apology. It's on you to reach out. It's on you to say, harm was done. That's a reality. This brokenness is wrong. And you know, we always use that language that you used, Marilyn, and I say this with love. We always take this language of the bigger person, to be the bigger person, all those kinds of things. The brave thing is to reach out. the right thing is to reach out, right? That's what Yom Kippur is about. Like to make that, to take that first step, to make that apology, and not to be so certain of your rightness, or not so certain of your rightness that you refuse to do anything. I think that's kind of the power of it. So there's humility. There's great humility in all. I think empathy takes humility. I think humility is something that we are. I think as a society we're greatly lacking in humility. That's that all of our cultural forces are to lead us towards arrogance, and I think it's a powerful antidote to be thinking about humility, and to try to just approach a moment with kindness is our word for right now. To approach things with kindness. It's not an easy thing to do. I recognize the difficulty of that. Steve?
Oh, yeah, I think this vaxxer, anti-vaxxer is just a preview of what's going to be happening because of this gene editing. And in early October, the CBI Book Club will have on its topic The Code Breaker by Walter Isaacson, and I'll be reading leading the discussion on it. But in gene editing, that's going to be highly controversial, and ethics is going to play a major role in that. And for example, even at the KCI Institute right over at OHSU, they've come up with a method to make people that have in their genes blind do not become blind. That's already a major breakthrough.
Yeah, that was going to be the first. That and sickle cell were going to be the first cases of gene editing. And the issue is not as much gene editing as it is putting it in germ cells so that it's inheritable traits, so that this becomes permanent. They're fascinating new technology. The issues, the issues that, and the law hasn't caught up to the internet, much less caught up to these issues of genomics. What I think, and I agree with you on this, what I think we are seeing is how much our inability to actually disagree in an effective way is how we really our polarization keeps us from dealing with the major issues like climate change. I mean, we've been talking about climate change for 30 years and our inability to actually talk about it in a way that actually leads to action. This is the danger. When we are a polarized society, our politics become frozen, and we can't solve the big problems. We can't deal with the big challenges that gene editing is one of those. There are any number of enormous challenges that stand before us that we have the means to deal with. We have the knowledge, we have the skills, we have they're smart, thoughtful people. They're on all sides of any political conversation, but we have an inability to talk about it. And when we simply demonize the people on the other side, we really wind up nowhere. And that's a real danger to our society. Look, these climate change pandemics are existential threats to the human race, to human beings as the primary species on the planet. These are frightening things. These are challenges that we've not faced, and though we know about them, we're continuing to not face them.
You're right.
Yeah.
I agree with you there. Even I had formerly been a scientist in the Soviet Union. Even in Siberia, they have more wildfires there than the rest of the world combined. And one of the problems was they decided it's more the responsibilities of the provinces than the central government. So Putin cut off all of the money from the central government. So all these provinces are trying to fight wildfires with ancient equipment and not enough people. But
Yeah.
that's happening in other countries too. The whole political system in all of these countries is all screwed up.
Yeah, thanks, Steve. It is pretty much human nature that if we don't see a problem, it doesn't exist. We shall go back to when we were babies, like when we closed our eyes, then the world disappeared, didn't exist anymore. That's right. That is a problem, and then politically, there is success on for denying problems. That only allows things to proliferate in the ways that you are describing. Jim?
Yeah, even when.
Yeah, let me
we-
move on to let give someone else a chance because we're almost out of time. Jim, did you want to say something?
Yes, I'm stuck back on the kindness theme. It isn't hard for me to, in any given interaction, to summon up an attitude of kindness. It's an easy thing for me to sort of find, but it in this situation under normal circumstances. But in the last couple of years, I just don't see the end game. I think I've operated for my life's thing. Well, if I extend the olive branch, it will come back to me. Maybe not right now, but pretty soon. And so I can't get past that first step of, okay, it doesn't help me to talk with other like-minded people. I understand that for many people that does help to talk.
Mm-hmm.
It seems that there's no give and take in it. There's no where's the response?
Yeah, thanks, Jim. I hear that, and I think that's it's you're speaking really to the symptoms of the polarization that we've had. But I'm it's hard to take a story and kind of build it on to this is what happened. But we do hear about these stories of say healthcare professionals who don't start the conversation with an anti-vaxxer with what kind of an idiot are you, or who convinced you of this stupid idea, right? The conversation starting with a kind of active listening is actually what people say, which is the same kind of language the same kind of thing we've learned in the anti-gang people who've come from gangs and go back to talk to them and say, I understand why you feel like this is your family. Like, I hear you. I was there, and how empathetic listening actually is more powerful than being argumentative. And I think that notion, that's part of the notion of kindness, is that empathetic listening. It is understanding what someone's story is. Part of the problem is that we get triggered very easily. There are certain things that we hold very strongly. And when someone uses, we immediately go there and we get into the argument very, very quickly. And I think it really does take a discipline to be an empathetic listener and then to kind of lovingly share your story. and encourage empathetic listening back and allowing that dialogue. I think if you start with the goal of, I'm going to convince you of why you're just wrong in your wrongness, and just, I'm not going to allow you to just sit there and be wrong in your wrong. But all I have to do is present the facts. I mean, I spend much of my day listening to the news and rehearsing my arguments. Right? I know what I would say in that moment. I've got the metaphor that's going to completely change their minds. And I entertain myself for a few moments, but that's not empathetic listening. That's not compassion. That's not a kindness. I think allowing that there is another story that I don't know anything about. I'm not going to be. I don't expect myself to be convinced by that story, but I want to understand what that story is. I want to understand why that's so meaningful to you. I want to understand what it is in your life that makes you think this way. And I think that's just a different way of listening, I think. Almost out of time, but Sherry, let me give you the last word. Always give Sherry the last word. That's a good way to be.
I've been listening.
You're a little muffled, Sherry. Is your mic covered?
I was having difficulty with my audio.
Oh.
I've been listening to everyone, and we talk about forgiveness. I heard you talking about compassion. I posted a quote by Nietzsche about staring into the eyes of a monster, careful not to stare into that darkness or abyss long enough lest you find yourself becoming that abyss. But when I think about...
I'm sorry, I didn't quite hear, Sherry. You find yourself becoming, what was the last word?
You become part of that abyss if you stare into the eyes of that monster in the abyss long enough.
Staring in the abyss.
I understand that. But when I see children dying of COVID in the hospital and parents who refuse to vaccinate themselves or allow people to wear masks and endanger children, as a former teacher, counselor, and mother and grandmother, I consider that child abuse. And I find that unforgivable because we have enough knowledge to know that you shouldn't harm others. And so I haven't had forgiveness in my heart for people like that. And I don't even want to understand their point of view. I can understand trying to converse with them to help them if they're wanting to understand also, but not if they're knowing things and deliberately harming. And so at this point in time, I haven't liked myself. I heard everything you said. And I'm one of those people that found myself saying things that I'm going, you don't mean that. Oh, yeah, I do. Yeah, I do. My feelings are genuinely full of the rage and even, I'll use it, the word hatred for people who harm others. When somebody goes by a house and shoots into that house and a bullet goes through a teacher's head while she's in bed. Or last night or 2 nights ago, it was a car on Woodstock with a mother and her 13-year-old son, and the bullets went right through her car windows. Thank God neither of them was hurt. But police found casing all over the place. Certainly I can take action and get petitions going to lift every voice, and I can do things to take action, but that does not alleviate my feelings about the people who are harming.
Yeah, so Sherry, it was just really hard to hear you. So let me make sure that what I was able to glean is that the stakes are high. I mean, when you see these things that come as children are dying through the actions of unvaccinated, that this realms into child abuse. And these are, it's hard. The stakes are very high. and it's again not to argue about who's right and who's wrong. I think that's I don't want to. I'll speak for myself. I don't want to give up my sense of what's right and what's wrong. I don't want to give up my sense of responsibility in the world, and I want to. I know what this is doing to me. To just be living in anger, to just be living in disgust, is not making the world a better place. It's not making me a better human being. It's different in principle, and I think principles. And I'm gonna continue to fight Texas, which needs a whole lot of fighting right now, and stand up for voting rights and gun control, as someone talked about. I'm not in the least advocating for giving up on our principles. I am really thinking, though, about how we allow the hatred and the anger, what we allow that to do to us, and how that hatred and anger creates more polarization and locks everybody further and further into their opposite sides. So I do want to, at the same time, as I hold on to these strong positions and fight for those positions that I believe in, I also want to try to have compassion and empathy and kindness for the people with whom I disagree, and try to understand something of their position. When they're calling me and threatening to kill me, I'm not going to have a lot of compassion in that moment. I get that. The Second Amendment people, they're not big fans of mine when they threaten me personally. But I do also want to understand what's the concept, what is driving, what's the fear that's driving them.
Mm-hmm.
It's helpful to at least understand it. I think that's a piece of where we want to go. Thank you all so much. It was really great to be with you. Wish you Gemar Chatama Tova. May you be inscribed for a good and a healthy year. We've got quite a lot still going on today, and it's still beautiful outside. So if you're able, I hope you can join us in person. If not, join us online, because there's.
Thank you, Rabbi.
Thanks a lot.
Thank you for everything.
Quite stimulating.
Thank you to everyone. Thank you.
Bye. All. Shalom.
Bye.